Oh, I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a tremendous asset to the entire nation, because I think we have to have a blunt conversation about big pharma. And we look, Robert F. Kennedy doesn't agree with people in this audience on probably two-thirds of some of the more important issues. But that doesn't mean what he offers as a crusader is not something we should have in the national conversation. It could be incredibly important. The individual who asked about the Justice Department at the very beginning, there's no person that's better of articulating the issues of the administrative state than Bobby Kennedy Jr. And I would strongly recommend that the audience look at the Hillsdale speech he gave at the most conservative college in the country, or one of them. That was just a classic of deconstructing what the problem is. I would also recommend everybody look at his announcement speech. It was a little long, but it was incredibly powerful on many topics. So I think he adds something that's very, very powerful in this. And hey, if Carrie Lake's not President Trump's VP, if that's not the selection, you could do a lot better in a coalition ticket of Trump and Kennedy, right?
Hi, Robert. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say I'm looking forward to seeing you all soon at this gig for truth, unity, peace, and posterity with the Kennedy team. I'll see you soon. Bye.
2 years ago, the average price of an American home was $215,000. Today, 2 years later, it's $400,000. And the interest rates during that same period have gone from 1% to 7%. So that home is going to cost him 10 times what would have cost somebody 2 years ago. And most people don't have a prayer, most young people don't have a prayer of doing that. We all know kids that age who are living with their parents. We all know people, or most of us know people, who were about to buy a home. They were ready to do it, and at the last moment, somebody comes in with a cash offer and scoops it out from under them. We've all heard those stories. Why is that happening?
BlackRock.
There's three companies, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And those three companies, which all own each other, so it's really one huge behemoth, also own 88% of the S&P 500. And now they have a new target, which is to gain ownership of all the single-family residences in this country. And they are on a trajectory to do that. If they continue on this trajectory, by 2020, they will own 60% of the homes in American corporations. And so when you see those people, entities sweep in and take that home away because they made a cash offer, it's usually an LLC with some kind of ambiguous name. But the ultimate owner, if you trace them back, usually goes back to one of those three companies.
Presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. campaigned in Greenville today.
He's following in his father and uncle's footsteps by setting his sights on the White House. 7 News' Chloe Salsameda has that story.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is challenging President Biden for the Democratic nomination. Tonight he discussed the state of the economy, housing prices, and how his family shaped his political aspirations. It was a sea of red, white, and blue as the crowd welcomed Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to Greenville.
Greenville, I'm really happy to be here.
Kennedy is one of few Democrats challenging President Biden. He says the country needs a new leader to tackle the economy.
As I travel around South Carolina and other states, I'm not seeing many Americans enjoying that kind of prosperity. I'm seeing people sitting at their kitchen tables and wondering how they're going to pay the bills.
Kennedy discussed inflation.
The average income in this country is now $5,000 less than the average cost of living. So basic human needs, food, transportation, and housing.
And how the cost of war is affecting Americans.
If we hadn't spent $8 trillion on the wars, You know what we could have done? We could have given education to every student in America for free.
While Kennedy discussed his goals for the country, photos of his father and uncle could be seen throughout the crowd.
All of the causes that I believe in are the same cause that my uncle, that Robert Kennedy, that John Kennedy. If you go down a checklist of the things that they cared about, I would check every single box.
He's going in the same, field of work as his dad. I respect something like that.
I remember his father. I'm kind of that age range. And I really think he's a man after his father's heart, that he wants the best for people.
Kennedy also says he hopes President Biden will agree to debate him. In Greenville, Chloe Salsmeda, 7 News.
Kennedy will appear in Spartanburg on Tuesday.
Democratic presidential candidate and environmental lawyer Robert F. Kennedy Jr. appeared on the Des Moines Register soapbox stage at the Iowa State Fair Saturday. While on stage, he brought up memories of his father and uncle. He also called out concerns about the environmental impact of pipelines in Iowa.
And this is a classic boondoggle by which these big shots, BlackRock, Vanguard, Smithfield, and which is also partners on one of these projects, are getting control of their land. They're turning us into a colonial model, and they are strip mining the wealth and the equity from the American public. When I get in the White House, I will put an end to this, and this pipeline will never be built.
Backstage, Forbes asked Kennedy if he would consider a place in a Republican administration. Here's what he said.
I'm not going to. I've been repeatedly asked whether I would be, whether I'd consider being Donald Trump's vice presidential pick, and I would not.
But in any GOP administration, would you serve cabinet, anything like that?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
At the end of last month, Kennedy was denied Secret Service protection. In a tweet, he had mentioned that since his father's assassination in 1968, candidates for president have been offered Secret Service protection except for him. At the fair, Kennedy mentioned it again, saying,
I'm not going to tell you my security arrangements for obvious reasons, but as far as we can tell, I'm the first candidate in history to be denied Secret Service protection on request. My uncle got Secret Service protection. Teddy got Secret Service protection 441 days out, and he wasn't even running. So President Carter, who he was running against, there was a great personal antipathy between them, and nevertheless, he provided him Secret Service protection. John McCain got it 551 days out. Obama got it 551 days out. Literally, Jesse Jackson, Shirley Chisholm, you go all the way back, John McCain. All of them were given Secret Service protection much farther out than I requested. The excuse that the White House has given that it's not available until 120 days out is just specious, it's dishonest, it's not true.
He went on to critique Joe Biden's approach to the Russia-Ukraine war.
Mr. Kennedy, you're running to unseat a Democrat. You're running as a Democrat. My question to you is, what's your biggest issue with President Biden's leadership?
The censorship, the war, and putting neocons, war-mongering neocons in front of in charge of our foreign policy, and putting Wall Street in charge of our domestic policy and our economy.
So what would you do differently?
I would do everything differently. I would negotiate with the Russians, which is what they've wanted to do from day one. The Russians signed a peace agreement in March of 2022, which we just found out about, and Zelensky initialed it. And the Russians were actually withdrawing their troops in March of 2022 and April of 2022, and President Biden sent Boris Johnson to Kiev to blow up that agreement. And since then, 135,000 kids, Ukrainian kids, have died, and 50,000 Russian kids. My son went over to Ukraine and fought in the Kharkiv offensive. He was a machine gunner in a special forces unit. And so, I'm deeply concerned with the welfare of the people in Ukraine. I admire their valor. They died unnecessarily to fulfill an ambition of the United States, which was to use Ukraine in a proxy war with Russia. In fact, When President Biden was asked about what the purpose of the war was, he said regime change in Russia. When Lloyd Austin, his Secretary of Defense, was asked in April 2022, right after they blew up the agreement, why are we in Ukraine? He said to exhaust the Russian army and degrade its capacity to fight anywhere else in the world. That is not about Ukrainian freedom. It is about using Ukraine in a proxy war, in a geopolitical dispute between two great powers.
Are you saying that it's the United States' fault that Russia invaded Ukraine?
No, I'm not. I'm not making any excuse for Vladimir Putin. His invasion was illegal, it was brutal, and he had other options. But did we deliberately provoke the action? Yes, we did. Again and again and again, we would not allow Zelensky to sign the Minsk Accords in 2019. Zelensky ran as the peace candidate. He's a comedian. He's an actor, which I'm not disparaging because that's what my wife does. But he had never been in politics. But he won with 70% of the vote. Why? Because he ran promising that he would sign the Minsk Accords, which were already agreed to by Russia, by France, and by Germany. And then the United States, our White House, went over there and we would not let him sign. If we had let him sign, this war would have never happened and all those kids would be alive today.
The DNC will not be hosting a debate for the handful of Democratic candidates going against incumbent Joe Biden. Kennedy emphasized that the candidates should be picked by the people and not by the party.
You know, like I said, I think we're living in a period of our history, and it's really important to convince the American public that the system is not rigged against them, that we have a real democracy in our country. And part of having a democracy is that the public actually, the rank and file of the Democratic Party, the public gets to pick the candidate. It's not picked by the party like they do in the Soviet, or they did in the Soviet Union. It should be picked by the people. And they're not, the best way to pick them is to have debates, to have town halls, to do retail politics, to come out to places like this, to face the press, to face the public. Because otherwise, we have politicians who are living inside of a bubble. And the only people they're talking to are the billionaires who are writing them checks. And we need people. I see what's happening in the American heartland. I see the desperation, the mental illness, that we've never seen anything like this before, the epidemics of opioids firsthand. The epidemics of alcoholism, of depression, of drug abuse, of the use of, the absolute use of SSRIs, and the debt, this extraordinary debt that Americans are being crushed by. And if you're not actually talking to people, going to kitchen tables, and talking to them, it's very easy for politicians to sit in a big mansion in Washington, D.C. and forget about the rest of the country. And I don't think that's good for our democracy.
Presidential hopefuls will continue to make an appearance at the Iowa State Fair through August 20.
Are you here? I am. He is. Many of us are. E pluribus unum. This is the Paul Leslie Hour. Our guest on this episode was born in Washington, D.C. and grew up in America's golden age. Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. He wants to reclaim democracy, and he's running for President of the United States. When you start a movement, you've got to move. Like from sea to shining sea? Yes. And it so happens Mr. Kennedy and his wife, Cheryl Hines, were in Florence, South Carolina. It was there that Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. spoke with your host, Paul Leslie. Before we begin, if you would please, subscribe to Paul Leslie's YouTube channel. We thank you in advance. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to start this program. RFK Jr.
Well, Mr. Kennedy, it's a great pleasure. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. Thank you for having me. It's an honor. I want to tell everybody out here, I read this book last year. This is a gift from my father. And I said to myself, there's one person I want to talk to this year, and that would be Robert Kennedy. And it's a pleasure to have this chance. Mr. Kennedy, what have you given up to run for president, and why is it worth it to you?
That's an interesting question. I'm enjoying the process of running, but it's definitely a tough process. It means being away from home a lot. It means being away from my family, and many of the issues that I feel strongly about are issues that other members of my family also feel strongly about, and don't share my beliefs. And our family's always been a very, very close family, and these issues have separated us in some ways. So that's always difficult. But I feel privileged to be able to make this run. I feel I'm happy. The amount of attention that it's getting, and that I'm able to speak to large groups of people and getting enthusiastic around. So I feel grateful.
I know a lot of people out there, they watch that very riveting interview you did with Tucker Carlson. It seems that as non-mainstream or alternative sources of media are becoming more and more popular, we're seeing more of government and also big corporations kind of getting involved and suppressing speech, if I may say. What do you think is the biggest threat to our free speech today as Americans?
Well, I think there's always a narrative that the mainstream media follows, and that part of that narrative has been driven by the corporate contributions to advertising, which gives the corporations not only a platform for pushing their product, but also control over content of the evening news. And so that's kind of a form of censorship, but the worst kinds of censorship are censorship that is driven by the government. And the cases that we've seen recently that were revealed by Judge Doty's decision, was a 155-page federal court decision, shows that the White House, in both the Trump and Biden administration, were deploying intelligence agencies from the FBI, the CIA, and others, the IRS, even the Census Bureau for some reason, to silence criticism of White House policies. And that, to me, is very dangerous, because a government that is able to silence its opponents or its critics has license for any kind of atrocity. And we saw a full-blown attack on our constitutional rights during the lockdowns. We saw churches closed. We saw jury trials abolished for people who wanted to, were injured by pharmaceutical companies. And we saw track and trace surveillance that overwhelmed our Fifth Amendment rights, or prohibitions against warrantless searches and seizures. We saw property rights essentially abolished, as 3.3 million businesses were closed without due process or just compensation. And all that really occurred because the First Amendment right of free expression was first put under control by the government. I mean, we had the revolution largely in this country because of the outrage of King George III being able to control and to bully the press, to censor criticism. And, we can't, as a nation, if we're going to keep democracy, we can't afford to do that.
I attended your event in Charleston, and one of the things that struck me is there was every type of person there, from people with dreadlocks to veterans camps, and some people that were Trump supporters. Why do you think it is that people who like Trump, some of them have come over and started listening to you and they like you?
I think we both have a populist message. I think the Democratic Party has become more and more a party that represents Wall Street, that represents the war machine, that represents a very, very belligerent foreign policy. And the demographics of the Democratic Party are changing as well. 9 of the 10 wealthiest counties in America are now Democrat. And, when I grew up, the party that I grew up with, it was a working class party. And I think more and more the working class people in this country feel that they don't have a home, so they're willing to, they're anxious to find some leadership that is representing their issues.
You answered my next question. Has the Democratic Party lost its way?
Yeah, I think it's lost its way, as I say. The Democratic Party I grew up with was the Peace Party. It's now the War Party. It was the party of working people. It's now the party of Wall Street. I think the party is redeemable, and that's one of the reasons that I'm running, to try to summons the party back to its initial values and the constituencies that it has always served, which are Americans or working class, middle class, ordinaries, against the domination of corporate power. And right now we're seeing this emergence of corrupt corporate power that is merged with state, with the agencies that are supposed to be regulating those corporations. And that's an issue that I've been fighting against for 40 years, suing large corporations who have these alliances with the regulatory agencies. And I feel that puts me in a good position to unravel that, what do you call that, corporate capture as President of the United States.
Mr. Kennedy, my last question, this comes from the actor and singer Robert Davi. His question: what is America to you?
Well, I've always had a sentimental view of this country as the world's exemplary democracy. And to me, that does not mean pushing democracy at the barrel of a gun, but rather modeling the best virtues of democracy for the rest of the world. I still feel very good about our country.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
We thank you and appreciate you dropping in for the Paul Leslie Hour today. You can help the Paul Leslie Hour in our mission to provide independent media content like this by visiting www.thepaulleslie.com/support. We truly thank you. Performance of The Entertainer intro song and Corina outro song, courtesy of John Primorano. Videography by Robert McCready. Video editing by David Knapp. Well, that's it for today. So until next time, be safe and be good. This is your announcer speaking.